Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week I'm going to be restoring this Boardman hybrid bike. This bike is a commuter bike. It's been used daily for 3 years. It's never had a service. This is the first time it's been into the workshop and it is absolutely on its last ride. That cassette has absolutely worn out. You can see the debris build up on those jockey wheels and we need to solve all these problems. You can hear here it's actually now stuck in one gear. You can hear me trying to shift there, but I've got no reaction at all to the derailleur. And you can see how the cables are slacking off when we drop that rear derailleur to its lowest gear. The front one is seized solid. There's no movement in that front derailleur whatsoever. So this bike, not only would it have been difficult to ride, it also was quite dangerous to ride because it had things like here, the chain has worn so far that we can get a huge gap under it with our fingers there. You can just see the stretch in that. You could literally lift it off those teeth. Likewise, those teeth have had it too. So we do need a chain set and a chain and a cassette at the bare minimum on this bike. So off comes that chain. That has definitely rid its last ride. So that's going to be removed and replaced. And then I'll strip the bike right down and begin cleaning everything up. So first thing off is the front wheel. Second thing off is the rear wheel. But look at this. I couldn't actually undo this. And this is the reason why we lubricate everything service to service that you see in our other videos. I needed a bit of leverage here to actually remove that skewer from the bike, so we undid that and then I was able to wind it off, and out comes the rear wheel. You can see here the thread on this skewer had actually corroded into the end. You can see the corrosion on both parts here. We'll clean that up, we'll clean those threads up, and this is why we re-grease skewers the way we do in the videos. And we'll talk you through that a little bit further down in the video. Next off comes the cassette. Because of the amount of wear on that chain, it would have elongated the teeth between the tops of these rings. The issue we have with this is if we put a fresh chain on there, it's just going to slide over the top of those worn out teeth. So we are going to have to replace this. You can see how grimy it is. You can see actually that the teeth are wearing on those smaller cogs. You can see how they're pointed off. So this does need replacing. Off comes the derailleur, and I was happy to see there the derailleur sprung on itself a little bit. So you can see here the cable is actually seized inside that piece of outer. We've got movement in the derailleur, so I think at this stage this could be salvageable. You can see there a lot of corrosion, so we're going to need to clean all that up and really see what's underneath there. But I also noticed here that the derailleur hanger was completely loose on this bike. Only a matter of time before that would have come loose on that and the wheel would have displaced and potentially could have caused quite a bit of problems for the bike, even potentially an accident. So off comes that rear derailleur. You can see there how dry it is and how debris infused it is. Really thick with the work that it's done, almost unsalvageable. And this is that rear derailleur hanger. You can see here the head of the bolt has actually come out, so I can give that quite a few turns. So that's one turn and that's the second turn, 2 complete turns that's come loose in there. So we'll take that off. I'm also going to take the hanger off because I want to clean up the frame around this area and also clean up that derailleur hanger before it goes back on the bike, and then we'll tighten those correctly. Next up is the front derailleur. These are very prone to seizing. The pivots on these will often corrode and they'll actually seize solid. So I'm hoping that this will actually free up once it's been through the ultrasonic cleaner and be reusable. So that's come off the frame and you can see how it's built up with dirt. There's a lot of grit on the back of that. We're in a quite sandy area and you can really see that sand there on that component. So the sand drops on them, then a bit of grease and oil sticks that sand to the component, and it's how they end up so deep with debris in this area. Pedal wouldn't come off, had to give that a little tap with a hammer. So we're using a heavy mallet there just to break off the threads on that one because we're going to reuse the pedals. So they're coming off of that old chain set. So that's the first one that came off with no problem. And then this is the second one, so we're expecting to have to give this a tap, but actually that one came undone quite easily, so that was handy for me really. Next up I'm going to remove the chain set, so out comes the centre bolt here. You can see the teeth on that, how they're very pointed, so that's the issue we've got with this one. So we're using a tool here to extract that from the bottom bracket. This particular chain set was obsolete, was no longer available in this gearing and with this length pedal arms. However, Shimano do offer an alternative that is this gearing and is this pedal arm length, but instead of being a 3-piece crank like this where you have the chain rings each side and the bottom bracket sitting in the frame, The later generation is actually a 2-piece crankset, so we are going to need to remove this completely and remove the bottom bracket and replace that for what people generally term the Holotech system. So it has an axle that runs through the bearing on the chain set. So the bottom bracket has got to come off as well. Although it was running smoothly, it had worn, so it needed replacing anyway. So I broke those off, needed quite a bar on those to leave that undone, and then out they come. And you can see here actually that the threads as these come out are in good condition, in good shape. That shell has got no issues or problems, so that was something we were relieved to see, that there were going to be no problems down that bottom bracket area. Next up, I'm going to remove the cables off of the bike. You can see here the cable is quite tight to pull through that outer, so everything there was corroding inside the outers of these cables as well. So that outer had also stuck in the frame here. You can see what a wriggle it is to get that out of the frame. So everything there needed freshening up and replacing, and we actually did both front and rear, and everything would be nice when we actually put it back onto the derailleurs. So that one comes out. I also want to remove the brake pads as well to make sure that the surfaces of those are in good condition, and also check the thickness of those to see what wear they have. So this little split pin comes out first. That's like a little safety pin to stop these falling out in any way, and then we can remove the pads themselves. A little bit tricky on this front one because it was touching the mount of the brake caliper itself, so I had to just wriggle that out. Now we're on to this rear derailleur, and remember at this stage we're not sure what we're going to find here and how usable it will be. But the first thing for me to do is to remove the jockey wheels, and you can see the one that I've already removed. You can see the thickness of the debris buildup that's on there. Quite bad really, and one of the worst ones I think I've ever seen. So we're going to just peel that off to give you an idea of how much is on there. That debris, it builds up, it sits under the chain, it stops smooth shifting, and it acts a bit like a bit of sandpaper. It will really wear out the chain and the components very quickly if you leave this sort of debris on the jockey wheels. It's almost incredible to think that that builds up, but that runs against the cage as well, so it drags that jockey wheel, also drags all your power and momentum away from cycling the bike. And you can see here just how much there was just on the jockey wheels alone. Absolutely amazing. One of the joys of this job is actually peeling that kind of debris off of jockey wheels. It's quite satisfying in some ways. But I also just gave the actual housing of the derailleur a little pick out as well, because it's amazing how much was actually stuck to the derailleur itself. So off comes that. It just helps the ultrasonic cleaner as well. If I just peel this off initially, gives it a little bit of helping hand. And you can see there again we've got quite a build up of debris that's on the derailleur itself. So we stick these parts in the ultrasonic cleaner. This has a degreaser in it, and we'll run this for a quarter of an hour. We don't use any heat on this, and this is a 6-litre ultrasonic cleaner that we're using. It's just about big enough to do what you want, and then once the parts have been through there, I can wash them down, which is what I'm beginning to do here. So I'm using warm soapy water just to wash these parts off, and then once they've been through there, I'll dry them off with a microfiber towel, blow them out with an airline and clean them up. We do quite a lot of work off camera. People often think that we're literally filming the entire bike, and we're not. So a lot of these components are then re-cleaned after we finish filming this to really bring them up and make sure they're really nice. And you can see there how they're coming up already. You can begin to see the shine and the reflections. And remarkably, these jockey wheels were actually in quite good condition, given how much wear was on this drivetrain. These were more than reusable. There was nothing wrong with them, so that's what we decided to do. So we're using premium grease there in the bushing inside this jockey wheel to lubricate those before they go back on, and then we're just using a little bit of our thread locker here to stop the axles that run through those bushings from coming loose once they're together. But you can already see there how that component is really cleaned up. All the debris is gone. Incredible difference you can make, and obviously I've actuated it to make sure that everything's working, and it is working as it should, so we can reuse this component and everything there is good. This is the thumb adjuster. Now again, this is something I always talk about greasing in services, and it's something that's rarely done, not I don't think done from the factory. So that's seized into the plastic outer that you actually turn with your thumb when you're adjusting it. Simple little thing. You can see there the threads are corroded as well, so I'm going to clean off the threads and the adjuster part of the body itself with a wire brush, and then turn that through its 4 axes. It's got like these little flat spots on the top there to grip that plastic thumb adjuster as you turn it. So we'll clean each of those up and then we'll re-lubricate this component and it will be absolutely fine to reuse. That's all cleaned up, the rust is gone, the debris that was stopping it and sticking it is gone, and then we can lubricate them. So I'm using anti-seize grease here on the threads, and I'm using a little bit of general purpose grease on the actual shaft itself that the thumb adjuster slides up and down. There's actually a spring fitting inside here that you'll see shortly that allows that thumb adjuster to slide up and down that metal piece. So once that's done, it goes back in the derailleur and we can fully adjust that when it's back on the bike. I'm going to also put a little bit of premium grease on the spring there. That will build up with debris again, no doubt, as this is a commuter bike, so I want to stop that debris sticking to that spring and stop it going rusty. And then I'll also lubricate the pivot points. These are worn and they are a little bit corroded, but everything's working absolutely perfectly, so a little bit of lubrication on there won't go amiss and will certainly help it along its journey when it's changing gears. Front derailleur remarkably was also salvageable. These will often seize up, you can see a little bit of corrosion on that still, but it's still usable, it's still working nicely, and once we've lubricated it and again lubricated all these pivot points, everything there will work as it should, so we can reuse that component. Now this is the skewer that was through the wheel as well, so we're just going to clean that thread up where it gone rusty. You can see there the red rust there where it really stuck to the other piece of the nut that goes on the end of that, and this is a moving part, so we're going to put a little bit of oil on the arm. That will help me actuate it when I do undo it. A little bit of grease along the shaft, stop that sticking in the axle, and then anti-seize grease there on the threads at the other end. So 3 different ways of lubricating this, but it will just stop that corrosion and will allow me to undo it next time without quite a struggle. The brake pads again were in remarkably good condition. I think they were the originals because they were the same brand as the calipers, but they hadn't got much wear on them. I think probably a bike like this where it is being used as commuting, the rider probably knows when to back off for the roundabouts that he goes around every single day or the junctions that he comes up to. Probably barely ever touches the brakes on this bike, so they were actually in good condition. You can see there the one on the right I've cleaned up with the wire brush, and the one on the left there still in good condition but had a little bit of debris building up, so we've cleaned all that off, and we do all 4 pads before they go back on the bike. Now I'm just going to turn my attention to the headset bearings. These were actually free flowing, but from experience I knew they weren't quite 100%, and the reason for that is again a little bit of corrosion. The bearings were fine, but the races that they sat in on that bottom race, you can see here, were corroded. Now I could have cleaned these up, put them through the ultrasonic cleaner, re-lubricated them, but for this kind of work I will just replace those like for like. These balls and the races are very cheap to buy. The main part of this job is the labour involved with getting them out, so if I'm doing that labour I may as well just replace them. I'm going to clean up the cups, and where you see on a lot of our vintage restorations we'll use single balls into these cups. With this one I am replacing like for like because this is a more routine bike, a more routine service than a restoration, so we'll clean everything up the same as we would with any other job. So we're using a little bit of a wire brush there, a little bit of degreaser, and you can see there everything cleans up nicely. So we're going to slide on the plastic cover there, and then a little bit of our premium grease around the center before we drop the bearings onto that, and then we'll just run a row of premium grease around the top as well, just so that they're really nicely greased up and everything's supported well. Same with this top cup, so premium grease, and in go the bearings, the new race there, and then we'll put a little fresh bit of grease around there as well, so as that works into the bearings, and then we can put the forks back onto the bike. So put the top cap on and the various spacers and everything before we can put the handlebars back on, so we reset this up the same as it was before we took it apart. On go the handlebars, and then we can just put the top cap in, which is what we actually use to put our pre-tension on the bearings as well. So we tighten that up to the pre-tension, and then we tighten up the stem itself, and everything there is ready to go. So we're going to wash the frame down as well. This lovely dark green colour really came up nicely when it was washed down, so I'm using a soapy foam spray there to get the bike nice and wet, and then I'm using one of our big softy brushes here to wash this frame down. I work there in the brakes and the areas that are quite hard to get to when the wheels are on, or when the chain set is on, or the derailleurs. Once it had washed down, it really brought the colour back out. It's a slightly metallic paint, that lovely deep rich looking green. It really did come up very nice once it was washed down. Don't forget, if you're on a TV, you can click down on your menu and across to like the video just the same as you can on a mobile device, and it's a great way of helping the channel out. Also wash the saddle, it's sort of hygiene thing really as well, just make sure everything is clean. I'm using a microfiber towel to dry this one off, and then after I've done this I'll blow it off with an airline just to make sure there's no water sitting inside any areas where it shouldn't be. And given that this bike was pretty well used, it's amazing how nicely it came up towards the end of the job, and you'll see that in the before and afters, just what a transformation we made to this bike, both mechanically and visually. So I'm turning my attention now to the wheels now that we've got all the other components cleaned and ready. So I'll sand down that disc. You get little score marks on those, they can cause some of the squealing that you get with older brakes like this. So I've measured the thickness of it, everything's fine, and then I'm going to use a bit of wire wool as well to clean the center on there, and then once that all goes back on the bike it'll just present nicely, and obviously got rid of all that debris and everything that can then get caught onto the brake pad, so that's looking very, very nice. I'm going to wash the wheel down as well. A wheel like this is a bulletproof wheel really. It's a double skinned aluminium wheel. It's got those straight pull spokes and plenty of spokes in this wheel as well, so they're nice 2mm spokes, and everything about this says strong wheel and is very, very unlikely to ever cause problems, but I do check it over whilst washing it down to make sure the integrity of it is where it needs to be. I'm going to grease the hub itself before I put on a brand new cassette, so we'll just put that original spoke protector onto the wheel before we slip on a brand new cassette there. Same gearing as the original one, and then I'll torque that as well, because obviously I can't torque it once it's on the bike, so it needs to be torqued up before it goes on the bike. A little bit of anti-seize grease here on the threads for the bottom bracket, and you'll see here we're using the new bottom bracket, and thankfully for us the original bottom bracket was a 68mm. We're actually putting a 73 into this one with a 73 crankset as well, and that actually gave us the perfect chain line, identical to what the original chain line was for the bike. So this worked out quite well for us, given that we were changing this component from an unbranded one to this Shimano one. That's typical of a bike of this nature. They're built to a price point, so they may have Shimano derailleurs, but they'll save a little bit of money by putting a different maker's chain set on there, which is why it sometimes becomes difficult to replace these parts like for like. So in goes this two-piece chain set now, that slips in there nicely. In go the new bolts for this one, so slightly different system for putting this together than taking it apart. So we'll torque that up, and everything there will now be ready for the derailleur to go back on. And we needed very little adjustment to the derailleur. It really was almost the perfect chain set to go on this bike. Using a little bit of our anti-seize grease here before putting the pedals on. Again, pedals do stick and they do need lubricating before they're put together to help reduce that potential of them sticking in the threads. On goes this front derailleur. You can see there how nicely that cleaned up. On goes obviously that original hanger that was loose, so we'll tighten that up correctly so we'll have no movement there, and that will make a big difference in itself to the bike. On goes that rear derailleur. And we had some marks here on the forks that we're also going to deal with. So what we're going to use for this is one of our vinyl frame protection stickers. Again, we sell these on our website in various different colours. You can see how the cables have rubbed against this, they've rubbed through the paint, they're beginning to rub through the aluminium underneath there. I mean, it's a big old thick piece of aluminium, so you're never going to have problems with it rubbing through, but we've got a little bit of damage here on the head as well. So we're going to use one of our dark green stickers here. You can see we do these in sheets with various different sizes, different cuts. You can cut these with scissors as well. They just help to detail and protect that frame just that little bit longer so that we're not wearing out even more paint afterwards. So that slips on there. They're self-adhesive, so they go on quite easily, and then we do both sides. We have cut one of those down just to make it fit a little bit nicer into that spacing, and then we can recable the bike. We'll also just pop one on here. Not the perfect colour match, but certainly better and less eyesore than the aluminium damage that was there, and then we can recable the bike. So we're using one of our super slick cables. These are a lovely thin stainless steel cable, nice and tightly wound, give a lovely performance shift. Everything's really, really smooth when we put these onto bikes, and we use these daily on all the bikes that we do. And then I'm just going to slip that one onto the front derailleur there, cut off the tail, and then put a new end on there, and that will then be ready to be adjusted with our final adjustments. But I will just torque this one up because the front derailleur does perform in a left-right motion, and I always like to torque these up so that any adjustments I do to them aren't going to be affected by torquing them up afterwards, and nothing's going to move either. So on goes the rear cable, again brand new cable, all brand new outers. Cut off that tail and a new end on this one as well. What a huge difference we've made to that derailleur, looking really nice. Now with these brake pads, I'm just going to put a tiny dot of our anti-seize grease on the back of these because you can see the rings on those. That's from the pistons where they've started to corrode against these pads. Just by putting a tiniest bit of lubricant on there, it will just stop those from getting any worse, and so we can put in the split pin there. Everything's safe, and that is now absolutely where it needs to be before we put the wheels back on. Same with the front one, pop in those pads, split pin through the center. No need to replace those, they're absolutely fine to go a couple of times before you need to replace them. And now we can actually put the wheels back into the bike. So on goes the front wheel first, then the back wheel. You can see how lovely that cassette and everything there is beginning to look in comparison with the original. And finally a brand new chain. It was the chain that had really let this bike go. By never changing the chain, he got an awful lot of wear to other components, where if it had been changed maybe just a little bit sooner, you may not have had to replace other components on this bike. So I sized these chains up before I actually put them on the bike in the video, so they're not straight out the packet and put on the bike. This particular generation has a pin in here rather than a quick link, so we just wind that in and just snap the back off of that, and everything there is ready. So I'm going to start running my way through the gears. So a few turns on the thumb adjuster there for the rear derailleur. That's now shifting quite nicely. And then the other thing I noticed here was that the B screw on this one needed adjusting. The jockey wheels were quite a distance away from the cassette, so I just adjusted that, bring that down. That'll give a more positive shift on the way down, which it did, and everything there is changing as it needs to. And then the front derailleur, absolutely perfect again. The chain line of that new chain set, everything working absolutely perfectly. And then onto the brakes. What I'm doing when I'm pulling the brakes is making sure that the calipers are central to the disc, that we've got no rubbing, and that everything's smooth there, and that they're releasing evenly both sides of that disc, and everything is good there as well. I'm going to torque up the bike, so I start to go through the bike by torquing the crown of the stem, and then I'd also noticed during the work that the handlebar grips were loose on both the left and the right hand side, so if you'd swerved to miss anything, you might have ended up with this in your hand and no handlebar underneath you. So we want to make sure that's safe and tighten those up as well. Also tighten up the brakes and shifters. You can see there that's actually loose, so good reason to go through a bike with a torque wrench. Obviously we've had the handlebars off, so we need to torque this stem up to make sure that that's safe. That's all good. And then check the pedals, because obviously again we've had those off, so we want to make sure they're correct. And in this video we've actually used 3 different torque wrenches. We've got this one here which we're using on the pedals. We also used on the bottom bracket a slightly different one that has a left hand torque as well as a right hand torque, and then we use this smaller 1/4 inch drive one here to do the smaller fittings. You can see here the saddle is loose. Very common for saddles to work their way loose, so we need to make sure that it's all spec'd up and correct, so we torque that up as well. That's why we go right the way through a bike with a torque wrench, to find these little things that have come loose, and also to check our own work. And then we've just got the brake calipers to make sure that they're tight, including these 2 mount bolts here on the side. They had a little 1/4 of a turn in each before they torqued up, so we're glad that we went right through the bike. You can see here, massive difference to this bike. Lovely reflection now in the paint, lovely reflections now in all the components. So I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy these before and afters. Do like and subscribe to the channel. Remember, on your TV that's down and across to like the video, helps us enormously, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.